The first review of Year 3 was High on Life by Squanch Games, a first-person comedy shooter with talking guns, good gameplay, and some fun ideas that it milked all the way until they bled and then it got really awkward and gross and not fun for anyone anymore. The game was pretty aggressively broken on release in ways that actually made the game a bit more fun, but not quite fun enough to distract from the painful dialogue, weird audio mixing, and character models that looked like I made them in college. It scores a 55 and lands dead mid of the C tier. Dead Space is the 2023 remake of the 2008 third-person horror shooter that revolutionized ultraviolence in video games for generations. The gameplay is super clean if you ignore all the blood splattering, and it sets itself in a sci-fi world that effectively asks itself, what if Halo, but every enemy is just the Flood, and you're not a soldier, you're just an engineer who's really good at breaking his tools in the most violent ways possible. Turns out that world is horrifying and absolutely rules. Also, props to EA for having the restraint to release a fully finished, non-buggy, non-exploitative game as a single-player experience. I know that must have been very hard for them. Dead Space scores a 94, placing it solidly at the highest point of the S tier. Elden Ring is a game where I was late to the party in terms of reviewing, and it's only the second most obnoxious game that I got footage for. It functions as the culmination to almost everything that came before it, becoming the most polished version of the gameplay formula that FromSoft pioneered through Dark Souls, starting with Demon's Souls, but with the added speed found in Bloodborne. And in an open world in a setting that was written by the author of Game of Thrones, yes really, and you've got a recipe for greatness. Elden Ring scores a 93, tying with God of War 4 and cementing itself into a well-deserved S tier. Now for the review that got me what I had hoped was going to be the most heat all year, but boy howdy was I wrong. Metroid Prime Remastered is the polished up 2023 version of the 2002 first-person Metroidvania game many Millennial and Gen Z grew up with. It has improved options for control schemes, vastly improved models and textures, and the bonus content seen in the version from Metroid Prime Trilogy. However, upon playing it critically as an adult, I realized that the game is a marvelous experience marred by pacing and reward cycle issues that go from incredible to just a crawl. And a crawl that eventually turns into a slog once it becomes a collectathon in its final hours. Sadly, it's a pioneer that didn't age quite as well as I remembered. It scores a 76 and is placed right at the top of B tier. Metroid Dread is a game so nice I reviewed it twice. I say that, but I did the exact same thing for Resident Evil Village, but we'll get there. Metroid Dread was once thought to be long dead and abandoned, only to emerge from development hell and be one of the best Metroid games ever made. It's a 2D Metroidvania shoot-em-up-y affair with super tight platforming, fun movement options that create a high skill ceiling, and a boss rush mode that more games should really bring back. Also, it canonized Samus's final smash, so that's incredibly dope. Metroid Dread scores an 88 and lands itself at the top of A tier. Resident Evil 4 is the 2023 remake of...
I feel like we've been here before. Have we been here before?
Of the 2004 third-person horror shooter that revolutionized the...
Wait a minute!
Oh, okay, Dead Space was 2008, so that's okay. It's the 2023 remake of the famed third-person horror action shooter that catapulted itself into becoming arguably the single most beloved Resident Evil game of all time. Fortunately, the game is also really good, and with the remake it aged very well. That said, some hiccups with characters and continuity errors, which totally won't come up for another Resident Evil game later, hold it back from being as perfect as it could have been. Resident Evil 4 Remake scores a 92, sadly making it just 1 point shy of S tier, and instead making it the new head of A tier. Sorry Metroid Dread, that didn't last long. Star Wars Jedi Survivor was the sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which I think was best summed up when I said this, which you may remember as one of the very rare Star Wars games that EA didn't do everything in their power to ruin the entire industry with. It has the same DNA as Fallen Order, taking the combat from the new God of War games and a setting that adds Uncharted-style exploration with a bit of Metroidvania level design and backtracking for good measure, because why not, I guess? Unfortunately, that recipe for success got oversalted a bit, and by a bit, I mean with the entire shaker, with weird continuity errors, writing decisions, illusions of impact, and a buggy release which definitely holds the game back from succeeding the way its predecessor did. Jedi Survivor scores a 60, placing it it just above Callisto Protocol at the back end of B tier. Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, and it quickly became the fastest-selling Zelda game of all time. It takes the open-world freedom from the previous game and balances it out with elements from the traditional Zelda formula that were lost in Breath of the Wild, but people genuinely liked. It reintroduces a critical path with actual, albeit short, dungeons, while also allowing you the ability to complete all the steps of the critical path in essentially any order you choose. And for your efforts, you are awarded with an epic final boss with the most lore-accurate version of Ganondorf we've ever seen. With these, Tears scores a 93 to tie with Elden Ring and God of War in the S tier. From one of the best of the year to one of the worst, Hunt Down the Freeman is a well-known Half-Life fan game that makes my head hurt. It's not just the being a bad fan game of a Valve property, the baffling level design, the gaping continuity errors, we'll come back to that later, or the writing that really wants you to take it seriously, except not really sometimes. It's the fact that it's a bad fan game with baffling level design, gaping continuity errors, terrible writing, which was also made using Valve's intellectual property models and game engine to be sold for real, actual money on Valve's own storefront. If this game was less of a work of passion and more of a prank to see how much the devs could get away with in terms of Valve, I'd completely believe it. Hunt Down the Freeman scores a 33, making it the first of the worst in D tier. Moving from begrudged to beloved, Vanquish is a third-person sci-fi shooter made by Shinji Mikami, which was also the progenitor of another beloved game developed by the same studio, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. It has fast-paced and unique combat based around your special suit that has jets in the legs, allowing you to slide around, react in bullet time, and look really sick in cutscenes. Unfortunately, the game is quite the one-trick pony, with the awesome gameplay being about all it has going for it, ending on a political note that I don't think I can show on the internet without getting disappeared. Also, it's really, really short, which is definitely the worst thing about the game. It scores a 66, putting it just 1 point behind Stray in B tier. Lies of P was the game that I was most looking forward to in 2023, and it did not disappoint. It's a unique retelling of Pinocchio in a Victorian clockwork punk setting, and on top of that, it acts as a love letter to From Software. Lies of P is a Souls-like, but it draws inspiration from Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, and then looked over at the ATB gauge system from Final Fantasy VII Remake and said, yeah, I'll have that too. It is far and away one of the most fun and unique Soulsborne experiences I've ever had, even if it has some really bad morals to teach about what it means to be human. Lies of P scores an 88, tying Metroid Dread on the top end of A tier. Spider-Man 2 is the 2023 sequel to the 2018 Insomniac Spider-Man, 2020 Miles Morales, apparently. It was a remarkably controversial game for all the wrong reasons, and it's a shame that it was controversial politically and not for the reasons that it actually deserved, like, oh, I don't know.
What the fuck are you wearing?
Insomniac launching half of a game that needed a 36GB patch to even be playable. That said, it took everything good about the previous games and made more of it, plus a massive amount of fan service by drawing on different places from the Venom comics. Add on to that an expanded combat system and a very solidly written story, and you can almost ignore how broken this game was on launch. Almost. Spider-Man 2 scores an 84, putting it just 1 point ahead of its predecessor in the A tier. Oh hey, speaking of those gaping continuity errors, Resident Evil Village is a game so mid I reviewed it twice because I was the first game that I ever reviewed and I wanted to do it justice with better video and better hardware. It's a first-person horror shooter that functions as a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7, and going through the concept art and the extra content, of which there is a ton to the game's credit, a huge amount of thought went into making the game. Unfortunately, the execution on a lot of those ideas wasn't spectacular, and much like Callisto Protocol, it's sad to see so much slip through the cracks of a game with otherwise such wonderful attention to detail. It scores a 75, dropping itself just under Metroid Prime at the top of B tier. From peak mid to just actually bad, Lord of the Rings Gollum is best described by Omni-Man when he says,
Sure.
but you should have died at birth.
It was a great example of the fever dream that can happen when Metroid Prime-style crunch time does not go well. A third-person platforming adventure game with fall damage and objectives that literally tell you to wait until the game starts happening around you. My heart goes out to the devs at Daedalic Entertainment who all lost their jobs over this because it was more than a few of them and it was a really, really trashy situation. Lord of the Rings Gollum scores a 30, landing it behind even Hunt Down the Freeman in D tier. Baldur's Gate 3 is the D&D video game that I correctly predicted 6 months in advance was going to win Game of the Year. Don't at me because it did. It is a more or less isometric third-person adventure game based on the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, and a game with such ridiculous depth of customization, dialogue and character interactions, gameplay mechanics, and replayability that its only real competition for Game of the Year was Tears of the Kingdom. It also has a lot of problems despite all of its achievements, and because of those problems, the game actually scored in the top of A tier next to Metroid Dread. But unironically, out of fairness for Elden Ring, another Game of the Year winner, I went to reevaluate based on one thing. See, of the categories that I score games on, 2 of them thus far are hidden categories. One is accessibility, which is new as of year 3, and the other is one that's been in ever since year 1. Value for money. How much content does a game give you per dollar that you spent on it? If the game provides wildly more content than its launch dollar value would indicate, I will allow it to break the scale and make up additional points that it may have lost. Elden Ring gave me around 3 times the amount of content that I would expect from a game which would max out the value for money scale, so I gave it an additional 3 points. Baldur's Gate 3, on the other hand, gave me double what Elden Ring did and then some. And so by the sheer enormity of how much value you get for your purchase, Baldur's Gate 3 claws its way back from high A tier to tying with Dead Space Remake with a 94 at the top of S tier. And now that we're here, send it! Now let's get a rundown of the opinion score tier list, and upon reflection, I'm almost certainly going to change this one because I give way too many 10 out of 10s. But that's for next January. As for now, holy crap, this game is not fun enough to be this annoying! And it's not even about the talking guns or the endless amounts of Justin Roiland. It's just that it won't stop telling you what to do. There's a difference between having good tutorials, being intuitively designed, and just barking orders. High on Life can shove it, 3 out of 10. Dead Space Remake is goated. It's super good. The game scored so high, mostly by virtue of the fact that there's almost nothing wrong with it. It's just a super neat experience, except I didn't struggle with it as much as I did the first time. Maybe I've just gotten better at games, but I never actually beat the original Dead Space. I got into this weird situation where I needed to clear out necromorphs of a given area before proceeding forward, but I always ran out of ammo and I just couldn't win, so I was kind of pseudo soft-locked. But no issues like that this time around, so I don't know, maybe they just improved the item economy. 10 out of 10. Elden Ring is a game that I was playing long before I had the ability to record it, which is why it was such a massive chore to get footage for. Especially considering that I essentially had to do the recording backwards. I had to first record from the end of the game on my first playthrough, and then get the early game footage from New Game Plus after beating the game. The game's amazing, and I would like to put it like this. Dark Souls crawled so that Bloodborne could walk, so that Dark Souls 3 could run, so that Elden Ring could fly. Super glad they're making the expansion. I want more Elden Ring to play. 10 out of 10. Metroid Prime Remastered started the trend of me covering games that I either love or are super invested in, only to be critical in ways that people really don't like and roast me alive because I'm too honest about the things I like. I'm a massive Metroid tard and I'm going to continue playing all the games in the franchise and you can't stop me, but come on guys, Prime isn't perfect. It was a crunch time developed pioneer of gaming. Let's just be thankful that it's as good as it is. Yeah, 8 out of 10. Metroid Dread is already on the list from year 2, and unlike a lot of games on this list, my opinion hasn't changed at all with time. Metroid Dread is sick. Also, if you're Metroid curious and you have a Switch, buy it. 10 out of 10. I got comments getting mad at me and asking me why Dead Space ranked higher than Resident Evil 4 Remake, and the simple reason is just both are excellent, but Resident Evil 4 Remake just has issues that Dead Space Remake didn't. It was just plain buggier and had worse attention to detail issues. That's about it. It was just polish problems. Otherwise, Resident Evil 4 was already good, and the freshness of a remake cemented that core gameplay has aged like fine wine. Also, to be completely real with you, it scared me more than Dead Space ever did with the Regeneradores who can continue to die in a fire! Yes, it's been a year. No, I'm not putting them out. Also, can we talk about the fact that one of the best games of all time made an escort mission that lasts for half of the game tolerable? A 9 out of 10, that's pretty nuts. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is easily one of the biggest letdowns of the year for me. Not to say that it was really bad or that I hated it, I was just disappointed. Fallen Order was a stellar game that kind of shocked everyone, and then this one had the promise of jumping off from the success of Fallen Order. But instead, it was bugged to Dagobah and back and gave us a boss fight that was supposed to be really hype and tragic, despite the fact that it objectively had a villain that was canonically unbeatable, so there was no tension to begin with. So you just kind of robbed a character that we all loved away from us for no good reason, and then the character writing for Cal and Marin was super confusing at the end. 7 out of 10. Tears of the Kingdom is an extremely weird game. The game is incredible, it's super good, and it scored really highly from almost everyone that reviewed it, including myself, and honestly, as far as I'm concerned, it was really the only potential threat to Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of winning Game of the Year, even above Alan Wake. And yet, I've heard no one speak positively about it in real life. It's all on the internet. Matter of fact, I've heard almost exclusively criticism for it, especially about the map, which, okay, look, I am so done. I'm so done listening to this irredeemably terrible take that the map is the same between Breath of the Wild and Tears. First, there are new locations. Second, the old locations are different. Third, the Abyss is new and almost the size of the entire overworld. Fourth, the Sky Islands are new and are scattered over the entirety of the overworld. If the chief complaint isn't that the map is the same, but the map is empty, and that the overworld is just an expanse of nothing, and there's nothing for you to do in the Abyss, and there's a whole lot of nothing between all the Sky Islands, that's fair! But so was Breath of the Wild! At least the Sky Islands are honest about how much interesting stuff there is to do in the map, because if you were to cut away every part of the overworld that doesn't really feel like it's worth being in, it'd probably look a lot like the Sky Islands. In any case whatsoever, the map is not the same. If you think it is, you're blind, you're stupid, or you have problems with works of fictions being set in the same universe more than one time. Because obviously Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are just Nintendo trying to lazily rehash Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, right? I mean, yeah, there are new Pokemon and new gyms, and the map is twice the size, but Kanto's in it, so it's just Fire Red again. Gosh, what trash game design. Anyway, 10 out of 10 for the best final boss in Zelda and having dungeons again or whatever. I don't care anymore. Hunt Down the Freeman makes me angry just for existing. I feel a bit bad dunking on it because it's clearly made by fans, but on principle, there would be something a little inherently screwed if I were to go and take Fortnite, make a fan game, then using Fortnite's engine, Fortnite's characters, and Fortnite's assets set in Fortnite's universe alongside Fortnite's background story, and then tried selling it on Epic Games Store for my own personal profit. 1 out of 10. Vanquish is the only game on here other than Metroid Prime that I had actually beaten before the review playthrough, and ironically, that actually made it worse. Since I was really familiar with the game, I went through it even faster than I did last time, and the game was only 4 hours long. Bear in mind, Vanquish was a 4-hour-long game with no significant post-game content other than the bog standard achievements, which was sold for a full price $60 at the time. The 4 hours was still super hyped though. The game's kind of sick. 9 out of 10. Lies of P, I mentioned, was a game that I was looking forward to most in 2023 when it was announced in 2022, and dude, I was not let down. Lies of P goes super hard, and after seeing how much fun that I had with it and how highly I spoke of it and watching my review on it and stuff, one of my friends who has never played a Souls game before started on Lies of P, a game which combines every FromSoft game into one. Godspeed, McFly. Lies of P may not have been the highest critically scoring game of 2023, but it was definitely my favorite. 10 out of 10. Now from my most anticipated game of 2023 to a game that I kind of anticipated in 2023. I was going to play Miles Morales and put the review for that out on the launch day for Spider-Man 2, but it just didn't happen. Anyway, Spider-Man 2 was really decent, and I enjoyed it more than I did the last game, at least. And I feel like that's more a matter of this game had more highs than the last one did. Not necessarily higher highs, just more of them. Kraven was a villain that I never really cared about until this game made him cool to me, and everything to do with Venom was awesome. I also still really love that one bait and switch where the game goes all horror tone while you're playing as Miles and sets you up to meet a villain, only to then reveal Peter in the symbiote suit. Just chef's kiss. Beautiful visual storytelling. 8 out of 10. Resident Evil Village became really bittersweet for me in year 3 because it was this time around, this playthrough that I played for the second review, where I really dug into the bonus content, and in it, I found that every single piece of concept art has a little blurb on it from the designers explaining what their prompts were and what the goals of how things were designed were meant to achieve. And then I found videos that act as little documentaries about the development of Resident Evil Village. Did you know the reason that the game is set in this huge snow-swept valley that's surrounded on all sides by equally snow-swept mountains is because it's designed to make you feel more isolated and the snow is there to kind of take detail away? There's a ton of really, really cool stuff in here, and it makes me so sad as someone that's kind of that's design-minded, especially coming out of the graphic design kind of background, to see so many awesome ideas and how little of that actually comes across in the game. So, unfortunately, 5 out of 10. No. Snapshot. Need I say more? Rip Daedalic, 2 out of 10. I don't want to talk about this one at length here, so I won't. The short version is, I write my reviews after my first playthrough of a given game that I'm reviewing, and that playthrough for Baldur's Gate 3 was a struggle bus. Given the 20 or so hours that were completely and utterly wasted, just gone out of my life that I'm never getting back, well, I've put down games for way less. But after learning about all the dumb quirks and the decisions with regards to how the game functions, I was then having a blast on my second playthrough and actually loved it after the fact. But then my review dropped and the fandom entirely ruined the game for me. Haven't touched it since. Uninstalled. Just done. Regardless of how my opinion has warmed with time, my first playthrough was a 5 out of 10 experience. And now that we're through with that, hit it! And here we are, the objective and subjective tier lists for every game that I've reviewed up through year 3. If you've watched this through to the end, please consider subscribing and sticking around. Also, since you're the people that tend to care the most, and by virtue of that, I care most about you, I wanted to let you guys know that I'm working on setting up benefits for both channel memberships and Patreon, since I now need to pay the doubled student loans that I have somehow. Because, you know, that was new information this week. News about those benefits will be coming over the next couple of months. In the meantime, I have been LonelphyX. You've been awesome, and I will see you, yes, you, next time.